This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast brought to you by Prize Picks, coming at you Tuesday afternoon. It's February 20th, and we have a reason to do a podcast. Over All-Star break, Mike Conley signed a 2-year, $21 million contract extension. I was reported on Monday afternoon. Kind of a contract that solidifies what was the Wolves' biggest roster question mark for next season. We'll get into that. With Jace Frederick, Wolves beat writer from the Pioneer Press, along with some All-Star notes. Jace wrote a nice piece on Chris Finch. And then, Jason and I just haven't done an episode in a few weeks as I was on the road last week. So we'll kind of start. We'll talk about the last couple of weeks the Wolves have played and kind of set the scene for the post-All-Star break portion of this season. Quickly, Jace, before we get to Mike Conley, I want to mention to everyone that at the beginning of this episode, so you hear it and so you can hopefully come. Britt Robson and I will be doing a live show at Falling Knife Brewing Company this Thursday. We'll do a happy hour of sorts, kind of from 6 to 7 p.m. while we set up the show. Come early if you want to grab a seat. Then Britt and I will do a live show from 7 to 8 p.m. We'll sort of set the scene for the second half of the season. We'll also have a third mic so people can ask questions. People who are there in person can live ask questions. These are really fun to do. And it kind of feels like the perfect time to do one right before the Wolves play 7 games at home, starting on Friday against the Milwaukee Bucks. So Falling Knife Brewing Company this Thursday. Get there at 6, live show from 7 to 8, maybe 8:30. That's the plan. All right, Chase, let's talk some Mike Conley. Again, 2-year, about $21 million contract extension. I know just from us texting, both of our reaction is, wow, low number. And we can and we will get into some of the luxury tax stuff. What does this mean for building this roster out as it competes with the luxury tax and the second apron, blah, blah, blah. Less than 11 mil average annual value was pretty shocking, just from what I think we've come to appreciate Mike Conley's impact being. What stood out to you about that number?
Yeah, just the number. I mean, that is literally, I think, and this is talking to a lot of people. It was like, Mike, like the low end. Like I thought the low end of like what he would sign. And I think 2 years is generally like people figured he would sign, and whether it be an extension now or a deal with anybody in free agency would be 2 years. I thought the lowest it could be would be like 34. That was my that would be the basement. But I figured it would maybe be closer to 20, like a 2 for 40 type deal, is what I was expecting. And like I said, like a hometown discount, I would have thought for Minnesota would have been like 2 for 34. So 2 for 21, 2 for 22, like that's insane to me. Like, I mean, that's just like the value of player that he is versus what other guys like in that range are making. Like it just does not line up at all. And especially for what he meant to this team. And like, I didn't feel like Minnesota had too much leverage, just in terms of like, we got nothing. It's you or nothing. I mean, that's basically it. Like, yes, they acquired Monte Morris. Like, we still don't know how that's going to work out here. You know, like it's, and now it's like, so I feel like he could have kind of held him over a barrel, and he clearly didn't. Right. And who knows, maybe like the stuff of Mike missed some games recently. And it's like, well, you know, he's getting a little older. Maybe like he liked that long-term security as well, because anything could happen over these final 30 games for him as well. But very surprising. Very much like the Minnesota needs him. They didn't really have a different way to churn. And he really seemed to give them a very steep hometown discount. Clearly because, I don't know, like he likes it here. He's, you know, he clearly likes his teammates. He loves playing for Chris Finch and this coaching staff. His family likes it here. They didn't like moving from Utah. Probably doesn't want to move them again, especially as they get older. So that all makes sense. But just doing it still for that low, like that bargain of a number, to me was stunning.
It being that low makes me think it's more than a hometown discount. Like right. I think just economically, as we move forward here the next few years, it's just going to be different than it was. Just
with the apron stuff.
Yeah. And just I think the classes are going to change, and the sort of upper mid class, I guess, if you would call it that, like above the mid-level exception, talk like above that sort of $12 to $20 million range. It's been we've talked about this with like Ricky Rubio and Gorgie Jang and all these players who kind of sign contracts in that area. they ended up being like salary filler in
Yep.
multiple trades before they moved on. There was always in this new collective bargaining agreement that upper middle class, it needed to be addressed in some sort of way. And I think what they did was just ignore it. And I'm just curious to see again over the next 2 or so transaction windows what type of players are making around this middle class money, because it might just be one of those things where it's pulling like more and more money is going to the top of your roster, and we're getting more and more comfortable filling it out rosters with minimum or close to minimum players. I think that has to be somewhat of a factor because, and obviously the hometown, and he's not wanting to move his family and all that too, but why would you not take it into free agency a little bit? You know, if like, or are you just trying to help the team? I guess financially. I don't know.
I think that has to be it because, like, Dane, like he signed for less than the mid level,
which a million teams could offer him. Yeah.
I know exactly. It's not like well, teams just don't have cap space. Like he signed for less than the mid level, so like it wasn't like, dude, if you do this, it's a risk. You might make less than this. Somebody would have given him the mid level, you know, like so that to me is where like it's not yet. To be on the front end of something like, well, I think contracts are going to shrink down here for players. Usually you don't want to be on the front end of like assuming that's going to happen. So that to me was surprising.
So PJ Tucker in Philly before last season signed the full mid-level at the time, which was a 3-year, $33 million deal. And that was like, you know, it's kind of what like the toiling veteran, again, PJ was 37 when he signed that, as Michael be 37 next season. Like, that's kind of for that type of player who, you know, that type of player only plays in that specific situation in Philly. With the Clippers, he's not playing at all. Like Joe Ingles signed a 1-year, $11 million deal this year. Like it's more that type of player that we understand Mike Conley to be level, if not levels above. Max Strus signed 4 for $63 this past summer. Dennis Schroeder, 225. Jared Vanderbilt signed a 4-year, $48 million contract extension. Dante DiVincenzo, 4-year, $47. Like, those are the players. Aaron Nesmith, 3 years, $33 million. Like, that is what $11 million gets you on the market right now. And yeah, Mike's older, and who knows, he can miss half of next season.
Right.
But even factoring that all in, it's just compared to other players of similar caliber, and given how much maybe intimately we understand Mike Conley means to this team, that is a massive win. Even if it doesn't solve all of your luxury tax problems, it certainly pushes you less far into the luxury tax.
And it's totally like a thing where if you sign Mike for 2 for 38 or whatever, which like, I mean, like that's like D'Angelo Russell, you know, so like it's that contract wise, you'd be like, yeah, that's still a fair deal for sure. Mm-hmm. That is where it could have turned out where maybe next year, Mike, like eventually the age cliff comes, you know, and he steps over it. And then the year after that, you're like, oof, this becomes like very hazardous to us because it's not a good value whatsoever. Mm-hmm. This deal is like, there's very little, I think, that could work out. Like, obviously, anybody could suffer a season-ending injury whenever, you know, and you just can't control that. But as far as just like level of play, right. I don't see a level where you'd be like, this contract is killing us. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's possible anymore.
No, and within the context of just extremely expensive roster, otherwise, it's a huge win. But again, it's not going to solve the issues that they have right. this summer. I think it's probably worth us touching base here quickly.
You should
just
do
on
that.
What
that's what everybody's wondering.
Yeah, what next season looks like.
This is where I sit back.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this a little bit before when we recorded. This isn't like a situation like we're used to, where it's like how much cap space do the Wolves have this summer to be able to bring back Kyle Anderson or bring back Monte Morris? That's not what this is. It's about how much luxury tax are they willing to pay. They've blown past the salary cap line and the luxury tax line. So that's really what we're looking at here. So I can't give anyone a like, this is what they can spend on Kyle Anderson. What I can do is run through what the numbers are and give you what the luxury tax penalties would be. So I'll try and do that quickly. Next season, Cat, $49 million, Gobert, $44 million, Edwards, $35 million. Ants can jump up to $42 million. We'll talk about that if he makes All NBA. Jaden McDaniels contract kicks in. It'll be $22.5. Naz Reid, 14 million. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, 4.5 million. Wendell Moore Jr., they picked up his option before the season. He's 2.5 million. Josh Minot's 2 million, non-guaranteed, and Leonard Miller's about 2 million as well. So you add in Mike Conley at about 10.5 a year there. You give him 10.5 for next season, and the Wolves are at 186 million in total salary to 10 players. Remember, we got to get to 14. So we know that number is going to be higher than 186. And what the delta we need to be looking at is how much above the luxury tax line are they? Well, they're way above the salary cap. Salary cap for next season is going to be 141. They're a mile past that, not a cap space team. They're also clearly going to pass the luxury tax line, which is 171. So let's keep in mind there. 171 is where the luxury tax starts. Already got 186 million in salaries on the books. They're also going to be past that first luxury tax apron. We always say second apron. The first apron is actually pretty important too. You clear that, that's 179. They're definitely going to be over that. That means you can't use the full mid-level exception, can't use the biannual exception. Those are just like basically cap space gift cards that the league takes away once you exceed the spending value or spending level. They also can't do a sign-in trade, which I think is important here. Like the Wolves, it would make sense.
They cannot acquire somebody via sign-in trade.
Yeah, but they can't sign and trade Kyle Anderson or Monte Morris.
So they can't do either way.
Which would really help. That would really help this offseason if one of the two between Kyle Anderson and Monte Morris, if you could be able to sign and trade them for something, can't do that because you're past the first apron. And that's just the first apron. They're also going to be over the second apron. Even though Mike Conley signed this discount, that number's 189.5 is where the second apron starts. Again, they're at about 186 just to these 10 players. So above the second apron means just minimum contract players is the only way you can really add to your team or your draft picks, which they are going to have some draft picks, but no mid-level exception at all, not even the tax mid-level, and they can't take back more money in any trades. Now that sounds like a whole bunch of bad news surrounding this, but
so it has to be at least equal in any trade.
Yes, exactly. Which that's not the end of the world. These aren't like, this isn't a boa constrictor. It's tightening, there's only limited things you can do. And to your point about Conley, like, let's think about this from if Conley's fair value was 17, right? And he signed for 10.5. It's that difference of 6.5 million in terms of the luxury tax that makes the big difference here. And I think the way to like kind of illustrate that is we're looking conservatively right now at like a $50 million tax bill. And that's because they're going to be about 22 million into the luxury tax. If you do that, you pay that 22 million of additional salary, plus you pay another 50 million in the tax bill there. And even if they replace, that's replacing Kyle Anderson, Jordan McLaughlin, Monte Morris, and that other empty roster spot they have right now, all with minimums. That would get them all minimums, rounding the roster out, gets them to 193. Again, you're 22 over the luxury tax line. We're talking about a $50 million tax bill. Now, if you want to bring back Kyle Anderson or Monte Morris, let's say that's 7. So we go, rather than a $2 million minimum player, if you say that Kyle Anderson signs for 7 and you bring him back, well, that adds 5 million more onto your tax bill, which now you're 27 over the tax, which means you have a $72 million tax bill there. Like, these are the numbers that we're talking about. And the interesting one is Ant. Again, like he's 35 for next season. If he makes all NBA, which we can have a conversation about that, his salary for next season jumps up from 35 million to $42.3 million. And when you do that now, like you jump to 35 million for next season, his salary goes from 35 to 42 million. That means if you just replace Anderson, Morris, McLaughlin in that open roster spot with minimums, that they'd be about 30 million into the tax, which is an $85 million tax bill. And if you do the Anderson thing where you bring him back for 7 million and Ant made all NBA, you're now 35 million into the tax, which is a $109 million tax bill. So I say that all to mean like those numbers are still like insane and probably restrictive. We don't know how willing they're going to be to pay all of that. But just imagine if Mike's contract was for $10 million more dollars, we're already at the $100 million tax bill number before the Ant shit, before, bringing back Kyle Anderson or all that sort of stuff. So it's still looking like a tax bill between $50 and $100 million unless they make some sort of cost-cutting move. I'll let you respond to that.
I think the biggest thing for them from the fan perspective, and like that's pretty much just for sure for this offseason, you look at that, it's like huge to get that discount. It's like doesn't really matter in terms of like the players that you're going to bring in or be able to keep, whatever. Like this doesn't do very much for their roster construction this year. Basically what it does is like, and there has to be a limit for owners. So I'm not saying like just pay more money. There has to be some limit on like, we can't just pay. We don't have endless wallets here. But basically what it does is it saves Mark Lowry and Alex Rodriguez money. Like, yeah. That is what it does. Like because of the aprons, there's just not too much more you can do roster-wise because Mike signed for less. And that what it does do is, if you did a shake-up, if you, move somebody, whatever, like it gives you a little bit more flexibility of maybe if you got off this guy and this guy or whatever, now all of a sudden Mike's $7 million does matter for roster construction. And this season after this, who knows what it looks like based on what you shake around. But if everything stayed the same right now, saving $8 million or whatever on Mike only is saving money out of the owner's pockets.
Right. I'm curious to know, and we won't know this, but like privately, what's the line?
Yeah, there's got to be a line.
There's some sort of line of like how far into the tax we will go, which really, if you reverse operation, that is how much of a tax bill are they willing to pay? And the good news about this is you still have room yet to the line, right? Whatever that line is that they determine. I think there's also like, what if the line's low? What if the line is lower and they do need to make some sort of cost-cutting move? Again, I don't know. Maybe for 1 year they can just roll this out and they can pay that $100 million tax bill, and that's cool. I'm interested in the like thought process if they can't, right? And what is the cost-cutting move if they have to make one? And most people's heads go to Cat. Like, oh, this is the $50 million player. This would be a way, like, we could replace him with Nas, and you could save this sort of money. I don't like, show me how you get financial relief from trading Cat, I guess is my question, because
not for this next year. I mean, if anything,
exactly.
We're talking about a bunch of 1 years, like a bunch of single year deals or whatever, which not likely.
I just like,
you're paying that bill next year, basically is what you're saying. Either
right. And I just think if you trade Carl, like, and his $50 million contract, like you could do a trade where you take back 46 million or 45 million. So cool. You've saved like 4 million off your luxury tax bill, which might save you like 16 in the aggregate there, but that's not really answering your question. So when I was thinking about this and I was like, if they make a cost cutting move, I think it would be to trade a player into somebody else's cap space, right? So you don't have to take any money back. And with Carl, that just seems nearly, I don't want to say impossible. That's who's going to have 50 million that can just absorb Karl Anthony Towns into space. Right. I mean, maybe Philly's up there, but like practically, I don't think that's what it's going to be. So I go,
it's much more. I mean, if that would happen, you're probably taking back, somebody maybe sends back 30 and 20 to absorb.
I just think the move is, if you're going to do a cost cutting move, you cut it completely and you trade someone completely into cap space.
So that's probably like a Jaden McDaniels.
And Jaden might even be, I thought that I started with that. Jaden 22.5, like even that's a little too cheap number. Just a little, I think that's too expensive. I think it would be Nas. Like you could pretty easily trade 14 million for next season. You got to think there's a handful of teams that would be like, yes, first round pick, we will absorb Nas Reed into the cap space. And if you're up at that, like, again, 35 million into the tax and that $100 million tax bill, well, if you do that and you get yourself back down to just 20 into the tax, your tax bill is $45 million. So we're talking about like it could be $60 million in savings and I'm just using Nas Reed as an example, as a salary that I think kind of fits this. If they make a cost cutting move, it would make a lot more sense to me economically that it would be Nas Reed than it would be anybody else on this team.
That is the thing about that is that is again a 1 year move in that it relieves just next year's bill and that's it. Where like if you did do like a Jaden or anything and like, okay, for anybody in this conversation, like we know this is future stuff. Like enjoy this season, 100%.
Sure.
Nothing about this year's roster can change. Ride this out.
We're talking about it because they signed a contract extension.
Exactly.
1,000%. Right now, and it's All-Star
yeah.
break. I'm not trying to say everything's broken.
Yeah.
I know you're not either, but that's right to bring up.
It's a disclaimer. Like, yes, this team is awesome. They can make a really deep run. Should be a lot of fun. All this stuff. What else we're going to talk about right now? Like where if you did move like a Jaden, if you pulled the trigger on that, like that is really further down the line too, like as you're making, and I have to think there are teams out there who can pull the trigger on that. I always see like people from like Detroit, like quote tweeting stuff and be like, Jaden McDaniels might be expendable. Like whenever I tweet about like not like Nickeil Alexander-Walker being a good, like, so like, I think there are teams out there that like probably have the space to do that if they view him as like a really rising two-way wing in this league, who can be like a franchise pillar, then maybe they would move heaven and earth to absorb him. So that's that. And like I said, like that's not just for this year's cap, it's the year after that, where like a Nas is a 1-year thing for Minnesota, but also then it's the opportunity thing of like, well, if we can't do sign and trade next year, we couldn't, then Nas would be a totally lost asset for us after one season. And we know we couldn't pay him after that if we decided to, if we kept Carl and whatnot. So that's where that makes sense as well, because like it's your one chance to get some value out of Nas, like a first or something.
Yeah. And that's ultimately it's somewhere down the line, right? 3 years or whatever. Like that type of move is going to come. It's happened to every other team that has ascended and got expensive. It's just eventually how this works is it breaks up at some point. What they need to be thinking about is
teams can't roll 10 deep with good players.
No, it just, and probably particularly even more so in this salary cap environment. And so I wonder if eventually I bring up the Nas thing to eventually point to, I think that's the type of cost cutting move that they make once they decide, at some point they're not going to be in the luxury tax for 3 or 4 years and be the repeater team and all of that sort of stuff. I think that's the move whenever it is that they make a cost cutting move, is to actually cut cost by trading someone into cap space, somebody else's cap space. But for now, where they're at, the tax bill issue is less of an issue than it was, because we thought Mike would come in at 6, 7, 8 million more than he does. But the tax bill options are not, or the tax teeth have not gone away because of that. Kyle Anderson and Monte Morris are probably out of the picture unless some sort of other cost-cutting move, the Nas thing, comes to fruition. Jason, let me grab our first break here. Today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks, and they have a second half of the season props up. I looked at what they have for the Wolves. They have Rudy Gobert, more or less than 17.5 double-doubles. They have Karl Anthony Towns, more or less than 0.5 40-plus games the second half of the season. They have Anthony Edwards, more or less than 9.5 30-point games for the rest of the season. Also, Nikola Jokic is a free square in there, more or less than 0.5 30-plus point games for the rest of the season. So you could throw that in there too. I kind of like all of those for the Wolves. Like Gobert has...
Well, there are 30. How many games left? 30?
36. No, 20. No. 27. What are they?
I was like, they're not 36. Don't
27.
Scare me.
27.
27 games left.
Yes.
So that's important when looking at all of those numbers.
Yeah. So Rudy would need to have 18 double-doubles in the final 27 games of the season.
And if you somehow miss 5 or something, and now all of a sudden that number gets even smaller.
That's the risk. It's the injury risk, or it's the
back-to-backs, take one off, whatever.
Which maybe there's some of that for the Wolves, but broadly, I think that's what gives you makes you kind of believe that they will play, and which makes all of these like a better bet than if they played for another team that rest players more. But anyway, and you can disagree with this, and people could be like, I don't think Rudy Gobert is going to play in that many games, so I'm going to take less than 17.5 double-doubles for the rest of the season. I just find those numbers always interesting, of like kind of planting the flag and comparatively of like, okay, Ant 9.5 30-plus games. That's also what Trae Young has. Like kind of looking at it that way too. But if you want to place some picks for the second half of the season, obviously do that before the games start up again on Thursday or Friday night. And if you want to do that, you do that at prizepicks.com or on the Prize Picks app. using the promo code Dane will give you a $100 sign up bonus. Jace, we don't have to spend the whole episode talking about the Mike Conley, the contract thing there. I want to talk about Finch at All-Star a little bit and just how the Wolves have been playing recently, but I don't want to come back to the salary cap stuff. Was there anything I missed there? I tried to get all that in about 15, 20 minutes, but any other bigger picture salary cap related things for the Wolves?
Not really. I think we kind of touched on all possibilities for the most part. But it is like, it kind of like seals in like trade moving somebody is the only way to really like shift your roster. Like you won't head into the summer being like, well, this guy for a mid-level would be a really nice addition to the Wolves. Like that's done. That's gone. And so this is kind of it. Like, unless you make a trade, like this is the team. And certainly they would like this team. This team is really good. Like it's like a Denver now where it's like they don't add anybody anymore.
You just slowly guys trickle away and
they leave.
Bring in some second round pick guys.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like you develop guys and guys sit on your bench and you hope like your Leonard Millers turn into your Peyton Watsons or whatever, and that's kind of the plan. That's what you do when you have a bunch of high end players.
Nas one. Like,
right.
Again, and I love Nas. I don't want to see Nas get traded, but like those are kind of the questions I think. Again, if you're the front office and you're talking about this summer or next trade deadline or the summer after that, is you're going to have to make one of those moves, and so then you have to ask, what do we have internally that can step in there? Yep. And with the Leonard Miller point, like again, I still think he's like a center, but
sure, yep.
Like, and I guess. No, I don't think Nas is. I was going to say, I don't think Nas is a center anymore. I think Nas is a wing, but you could kind of see that, like maybe Leonard Miller in it, is a your ninth man for you or something like that. I just don't know. Like, I guess with Jaden, you have Nikhil and then you would move him in there, but that's ultimately what they're going to be doing with the draft this summer, or even just on the free agent market, trying to pick up young guys that could potentially turn into a Nikhil Alexander-Walker. You ultimately need to assess what you have there deeper on your bench so as to talk about what you can let go. And to your Denver point, like they did have a belief in Peyton Watson. And I think that's why they were like, all right, Bruce Brown has to go. We have another guy that we feel somewhat confident about plugging in there. That's an important like side hustle, I think, of the front office here the rest of the way, is figuring out who those back end people are who could be plugged in if someone eventually leaves.
You definitely see like the difference. And I do think in Denver, like when you have Nikola Jokic, like that guy makes everybody look better. Like your second round picks are going to be like, wow, what a steal. It's like, oh, they're playing with Nikola Jokic. Like game gets about 3 times easier when you play with Nikola Jokic. Like put Peyton Watson somewhere else and he might like lost. But you see like Denver, even with like the Jokic thing in there, has drafted guys that they trust enough to play and like fill in gaps and like they're adequate. Christian Braun at least like has moments, it's not always great, but he has moments where you see then like a Memphis having to do the same thing and whiffing on a bunch of picks. And like, I not saying like when they're at full strength, they can't still have a good team. Obviously this year has been an aberration, but like it's a lot harder when you miss on those pieces that fill in. So like this
Golden State too, right?
Yeah. Golden State as well. Like Kuminga has come on and he might be like that next wave of them. But other than that, they had a lot of misses. But like this upcoming summer, like, obviously, Tim Conley and company have done a lot with like the Gobert trade and obviously re-signing Nikhil and just the Conley Nikhil trade in general. But like this summer is the one where it's like you're kind of determining who you want to move forward with, and that is like which of these guys do we think has to be a part of our core? We almost redefine our core, and we decide who we can live without and who needs to stay. But a part of that equation is who can we afford to keep and what can we get back for these people? Like there are so many different numbers and factors that fly into all of this. It's like, oh, okay, maybe we can get rid of Jaden because Nikhil has been so great. Well, then next year you have to pay Nikhil.
Exactly.
And if Nikhil keeps playing that well, and then Nikhil all of a sudden is going to have a really big number next to his name. So these are all things that like, so it kind of comes down to, well, who do we want? Throw out all the numbers. Which player do you like better?
It's the living room full of balloons, right? That you're trying to like keep up in the air and you're diving on the couch. You're like, oh, that one almost, like that's just what it's that's what this, and again, this isn't a Wolves specific thing. It's, we can run through all the other teams who have in the recent past hit this same level. And I think the new collective bargaining agreement and the second apron thing is like it's sprinkled in like 3 more balloons, that they need to balance there. It doesn't mean it's impossible. You get your wins where you get your wins. Nikhil Alexander-Walker is a win because you found a $4 million player who's maybe your 6th best player on your team. It's like that stuff is critical.
Huge.
And
for these next 2 years probably allows them
to
contend for titles in some way because they have Nikhil Alexander-Walker and $4.5 million.
Boom. Let's talk about. Go ahead.
Last one. It does seem like with these things and like teams having to make cuts and move on from guys, like it should generate more where like terrible teams should be able to rebuild a little faster, right? Because like good players are just more available. Like not like your superstars, but like good players who at least can get you into like a 40 win range. Like Nasri could help somebody win 40 games right now. Like so we should have, obviously teams will tank because they'll say we just want these high-end chips because if you don't have them, you can't compete for championships. And that's true. But if you wanted to just like restart a little earlier, I'd be like, well, this guy could be a part of our core and we don't have to be terrible next year. We can be at least average. Like I think the path to doing that, because so many players have to be available now because, you just can't keep up salary wise. That should go faster, I think, for some teams.
In kind of a little bit more actually could add to parity. It's a terrible time to be an already good team.
Yes.
But maybe if you're a bottom 10 team, it's like this new economic structure is going to somehow create a little bit more balance. Like there are, I'm with that. There's ways to point to that.
If you're the Spurs and you can all of a sudden make a trade for like a Nas Reed, now you're better faster than like the slower rebuild with Wemby where you get there eventually. You could expedite it a little bit.
I mean, and again, I'm talking about trading Nas Reed as an example. I do think,
and that is not the option you have to take.
No. I think it's an interesting one though, in that it could really give a good return back, right? Yeah. Nas signed.
Yes.
You think about what Nas signed at, which was kind of less than we all thought. He took somewhat of a hometown discount himself. And then now this season, he's really shown for more than Nas week last year before he got hurt that, like, look, here's 50 games of him defending on the perimeter, not just being a 5. Like I wouldn't say like Nas Reed has had this electric season in many ways from a Wolves perspective, but I think his contract is even more of a value than it was at the beginning of the year. And so I don't know.
He's not just center. He's not just a center.
I really think a team in the right situation, like the Spurs or the Thunder or something like that, would be like, we will give you a good first. I would think that is very reasonable, for Nas Reed. And then the question for the Wolves is like, what can we actually do with that first?
Right.
Can we repurpose that? And that's where the sign and trade thing kind of sucks. Is like, wait, we can't stick that first onto Kyle Anderson to repurpose money or whatever. But I say that to mean there's paths forward. There's paths forward here that are a little bit uncomfortable, but maybe not like earth shattering to what your core is. You got your core locked up. You got Carl under contract for 4 more seasons after this. Rudy for 2 more, Mike for 2 more, Jaden for 5 more, and Ant for 5 more. Like the main group is locked in here. It's about backfilling, right? Which is what you were saying there.
I just would like, when you look at the few deals that we talk about, it doesn't matter. Like if you've got guys on big money deals, you're stuck. Like because we talk about Nas, that's a good deal. He signed for less than we thought. Jaden at the time was like, let's sign for either right or a little less than we thought. Mike Conley, less than we thought. Nikhil, like way less than he deserves. And it doesn't matter. You're still in hell. I mean, it really doesn't. Like you can be frugal, you can make these good deals, and it just doesn't matter as much as it used to. Because if you've got big money sunk into players, like that's where your money is sunk.
And again, not a Wolves specific issue.
Right. They're doing the best they can. Like they've pretty much done the best they could do.
Right.
Given like their core and how much their core makes, and they are still in this spot, which is fine. Like they have a great team, but like just as you look at cap sheets in the future and whatnot, it's like still screwed. But it is what it is.
And that was part of the whole idea. Even spin it back 6-7 months ago when we were like, they're running it back. And as well as running it back has gone. Part of before we saw it work, the agitation surrounding the trade was knowing that you were elevating yourself into this salary cap situation that was going to be onerous, right?
Yep.
And it would be, it's not at all terrible right now, but if Rudy and things didn't come together the way it's come together this year, this would go from like a prickly problem to like a gotta restart it all.
Yep.
So credit to them for like, they took a huge risk there. It wasn't just the picks. We talk about the picks all the time. It was about this and the ability to kind of keep your group together, but they've done the one day at a time sort of thing. One transaction, Mike and Nikhil for D'Lo, being patient with trading D'Lo, holding out for small things. Ant doesn't get a player option. Like there's been a bunch of mini wins over the course of these last 18 months, and you're still in this situation, which is tough. But they're probably in as good of a situation today on February 20th of 2024 as they could have hoped to be in July 1st of 2022 when they made the Gobert trade, right? Like that's fair to say.
Yeah, I think for sure. I think they've pulled all the right levers since then. It sure seems that way. And I agree with you. Like if they were like 5th or 6th in the West right now, we would be viewing this a lot more negatively. We would. If it was like they're not even going to host a first round series, they're probably going to lose first round.
Right.
And then what? But the fact that they could contend for a championship this year, it's like, well, it's all worth it. Everything's always all worth it. If you're contending for a championship, this is great. So it was a risk and it's paid off for them in a big way. But yeah, and I think the thing about what's interesting is I think the D'Lo thing showed me more than anything that Tim Conley will not just rush to make a move and say, I want this guy. We got to get this guy out of here. I think he was very calculated and waited for like the right deal to come, because I don't think they would have got as good of a deal the summer before. And I think that's probably a big reason why D'Angelo Russell started that season on the team. And as much as people want to talk about, pick and roll with Rudy, all that stuff, I think it was that the market wasn't there. And then like push came to shove at the trade deadline, you got a Mike Conley, who was a much better fit from anybody who like watched Mike Conley play, and then all those seconds, and then Nikhil is like a throw in as a young player with some promise still or whatever, like at least it's just a wild card. That's a good deal. So I wouldn't be. It'll be interesting this summer when it feels like they're like on the clock again. Like got to move somebody. I don't know if they'll do that unless it's like a good deal. Tim Connolly might be like, well, let's just play it out and we'll see between now and the trade deadline where we end up.
Right. There's, and hand raised here of like sounding the alarm of the second apron and all this stuff, but it is important context to know that like, yeah, you if you just do pay that $50 to $80 to $100 million tax bill, like you can just keep going, like at least,
and it doesn't
for next season.
And the bill doesn't come in until the end of the season, correct?
Yeah. So
like anything you do during the season is the exact same as if you got rid of it in the summer.
I mean, I would assume they make some cost cutting moves at the deadline next season. If this is how they do run it back again,
Right. Correct.
And like
to get even more data on
exactly.
who can we live without for these last 3 months, the 2 months of the year or whatever.
It's like the Warriors traded Corey Joseph and a second to the Pacers at the deadline. We're like, what is that? And it happened right before the deadline, hit. And then, it comes out, Bobby Marks tweets like that saves them $18.5 million on their luxury tax bill. Like those are the moves that the Wolves are going to be making down the line. And hopefully it's the Corey Joseph players, right? And it's not the Nas Reeds there, but those are all the things that they're going to need to sort of navigate here going forward. Let's talk a little bit about not the All-Star.
I should say one more thing.
Okay.
How they do in the playoffs is going to make a big difference.
Yes.
That should just be put out there. If they lose in the first round, if they lose in the second round in 5 games or whatever, they will view the offseason much differently. Yeah,
it's just kind of putting it through the lens of like, we know this team is absolutely contender status, quote unquote, in the regular season. And typically that translates decently well to being that and in the playoffs. But yeah, very well could be, even if it's like the 1-8, and you got to drag that out to 7 because I don't know, the Warriors did something that really complicated it. And then you lose in the second round against small ball or whatever. And you're like, I don't know. Like those are that all, you're totally right to bring that up. That needs to be stress tested. And then let's get back out the Google Docs and run through the tax parameters and all that. And if me and you were Mark Lowry and Alex Rodriguez, I'm pretty sure privately that's the conversation we'd be having. Like, yo, you want to drop $100 million on this? Like,
yes, yep. I like to spend other people's money, not my own.
Yeah,
It's very much like it's not only just like fan of like, can your team contend for
Right.
a championship or something, but like owners are way more likely to open up the wallet if they're like, I think we can win with this. Where if they're like, sure doesn't look like we can win a championship with this, maybe we should make some moves so we don't have to spend as much money on a non-title team, you know, like that, and that's fair. So like
totally.
If everybody wants to stay here and be a part of this thing, like go win playoff games. I mean, that's
absolutely
what it comes down to.
And make some money for the organization in the playoffs too.
A lot of gate, a lot of memorabilia, like all the stuff that comes with it. You know, like you have to produce. You know, like you should get what you pay for. I guess is in terms of ownership, and I understand that.
Well, it's just the way it works. Like that's just kind of how the majority of the not filthy richest of the filthy rich. That's how they operate, is with some sort of like, how much did we lose here versus how much did we make it? And that's what's hard about this. I mean, I love the salary cap stuff, and you know, back in the Tibbs days or whatever, it's like, okay, you know, like if they get Jeff Teague at 16, like they have another 12. Oh, they can get Taj Gibson. You know, it's just
it was way easier to understand back then. Like, much easier to just lay it on a sheet and say
my notes
A plus B equals C.
My notes on this piece of paper, trying to like figure out what the tax bills are, because it elevates per every 5 million, and you go back it's hard. It's just like, it's super complicated. And those are the answers that they need to figure out is, you know, what are we, you know, how much of this are we willing to pay? Because 7 million into the tax is a completely different thing than 27 million into the tax in terms of what you're paying. It's not just the 20, it's another 60, 70 or whatever on top of that. So, all right, you want to move forward to All-Star?
Yeah. Let's do something else now.
Okay.
41 minutes was enough cap stuff.
I really liked your piece on Finch and kind of the retrospective of the 3 years, right? And a couple of you got, John and Chris wrote about this too. It was a good like reminder to me of the like, oh my God, I remember the All-Star break 2021. The Wolves lose, they hire Finch, chaos.
Yeah.
They get smoked in Finch's first 5 games. He's not playing Jaden McDaniels. We're all like, what is this dude doing? And like what you wrote about is just like, he had no idea. He had no idea like who is on the team, and how could he? Like, we always talk about how important it is to have a training camp. He didn't even have a practice. No. And they had to go play 5 games before the All-Star break there.
And if you're like, how do you not know who Jaden McDaniels is? It's like, watch the scouting report. Like I always say this, watch the scouting reports that teams will bring in to Minnesota and they're guarding it. I'm like, why are you ever guarding this guy like that? You know, it's like, you're focused on your own team. I remember until like big games or playoff series, like you're focused on your own team.
Yeah. So as an assistant coach, you do the scouts, right?
Yes.
You get like, it gets passed around and you do like the study of the previous 5 games of the team is typically how they I remember Finch talking about this. And remember the Wolves played the Raptors like a couple weeks before Finch got hired. And he was like, because we asked him about Jaden McDaniels, he was like, honestly, I did the scout on the Wolves like 2 weeks ago, and Jaden McDaniels wasn't really playing in the games I watched, so I didn't know like anything about it. Like, and that was and that was fair. Like, you know, he watched 5 games of the Wolves, and Jaden was like the 9th man or whatever. So you have that in your mind, and you come in and you're like, here's the whistle, like, go ahead. You're probably gonna pick the guys you know their names, you know.
Right.
It's just it's what you wrote about is it's crazy to see how far it's all come in the 3 years.
I think it's crazy. From what I always thought about was like how many things have happened that can derail or like throw off, or like they don't seem like a big deal because they haven't been, but they've literally like, Finch was hired and all the talk. Because I mean, I cannot explain how obvious it should have been that they fired Ryan Saunders, and like, you know, like an hour later, Woj is like, and they're gonna hire Chris Finch. But everybody's like, you fired Ryan Saunders in the middle of a road trip, like you're just sending him home. You got like what a road game left. Like, why didn't you just fire him before the road game against the Knicks or whatever? You know, it's like that makes no sense. And people wanted to like get the timeline on that of like, why did you do this, Gerson Rosas? And it would have been so obvious the next morning to do conference call with Gerson Rosas where he explains what happened. And then you do your introductory press conference with Chris Finch that afternoon, so they can be 2 separate entities. So then it can be like, hey, Chris Finch, like, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? All this kind of stuff. Instead, there's no conversation with Gerson Rosas. So when he gets this press conference, which is on a Zoom, and they're just seated next to each other,
So
and
weird.
Chris Finch is just sitting there as everybody's like, Gerson, when did you know you're going to fire Ryan? Why'd you have him come on this road trip? Blah, blah, blah. Like what? And Chris Finch just hanging out. Maybe got like 2 questions, like, what's up?
He's
like,
just sitting there, like, stoic face. I remember it being the first time where I was like, oh, yeah, he does kind of look like Jeff Daniels. You know,
Yeah,
he was just standing there. He was just sitting there for
it
the
wasn't
whole
for
time.
him. It's like, here's your moment. You're being introduced. This is your introductory to being a first-time NBA head coach. And it's not about you at all. Like, and that was exactly how it felt. And then they played Milwaukee and they got just destroyed. They got destroyed that whole trip. But like, they came back from All-Star break and he had a much better plan of like how I'm going to activate these guys and work to their strengths. I now see what we are not good at. I think we might be good at these things. And then like, you know, you go through a full year of like, it's Ant. I mean, and before that next season, like literally you finish that year and you're like, yeah, there's some optimism here. Heading into that next season, Gerson Rosas is fired on the eve of training camp. Like, it's like, what? So now Chris Finch is probably like, I don't know what my future here is now. You know, I don't know who's going to be the Pobo.
And then he
here
randomly gets like they put the crown on him, basically.
Yeah, because
they're like, actually, we're going to have you be in charge of everything.
And that was basically because like it looked good. And then like he had a great season. You know, like, and like they won 46 games where like Ant was 20 and Jane was 21. And there were many times the year prior they sucked. You know, and yet they found like that high wall defense, like making Carl look like a good defender when he'd look like an awful one for every previous point in his career. And then like, okay, now we're going to hire a new Pobo and we have new ownership, by the way, too. And that came the previous summer as well. So like all these things are stacked against you that if you looked at it from like a macro level, it'd be like, yeah, this guy's going to be here for 1 year and then we're on to the next one.
Right.
But he was so good that they basically were like, let's build this around Chris Finch and whoever our Pobo is going to be, Chris Finch is your coach because we already extended him. You know, like all of these things.
And so good on defense, like you said.
Yes. Yeah.
And he came in, and one of the like things we got from that Gerson press conference was like, this is one of the elite offensive minds of the, you know, of the
and
NBA,
everybody
like,
and people like when the offense struggles, they hold it against it. Like I thought it was supposed to be an offensive coach. It's like it doesn't matter. He literally came back from All-Star break. And like it's not like he was working with the staff a ton then. Like it's pretty much his idea of here's the defense we're gonna play. Like, so he clearly understands both ends of the floor. I know Elston Turner is the defensive coordinator, you know, like, but Finch is clearly very heavily involved on both sides of the ball because he came back from a 5-game losing streak to start and said, we're going to do this high wall thing, just fly around. And it was right.
It was right. And it was the best thing that ever happened to Karl Anthony Towns as a defender of his career, hands down. And I don't remember what they were post All-Star break that year in terms of defense, but I would guess probably like 19th or 20th or something like that, like up from the bottom of it.
And then the rest of that season was like, whoa. It was a roller coaster, but the roller coaster was way better than just being in the dumpster. I mean, that was totally. It was like 2 games where they'd win and be like, wow. And then they would revert back to form and then they'd win 2 more. Be like, wow. Because the beginning of that season was like, this is the worst basketball I've ever seen in my life. You got D'Angelo Russell just jogging and being like, maybe he's really hurt. Oh no, he's just
that Anthony Edwards would be
coming off the bench.
Deion Waiters, honestly. No defense.
No defense. Look, offensively, it was like, I don't know what's going on here. Like directionless.
Cool dunk.
And then Finch gets there in like a few games, and then it's like, oh, he scored 40 against Phoenix. That was cool. You know, like
It is just so then I know the numbers after that season. Then the Pat Bev year, right before Rudy gets here, I think they were 13th on defense.
Yep.
And then, which again, Karl had been bottom 10. Every one of the Karl teams have been bottom 10 defensively every year of his career. They get up to 13th that year. And then even last year, which was viewed as a mess in many ways, 8th in defense. And then this season first, like Chris Finch, I don't know. Like we do nitpick on some of the offensive stuff, but I think it's pretty hard to argue that he's not one of the best defensive coaches in the NBA because he's done it with weird rosters and with rosters that didn't include Rudy Gobert. I think probably maybe nationally the perception is, oh, the Wolves are just good defensively because they put a good system in around Rudy Gobert. But it's like they kind of had a good system, scrapped it completely, created a new system defensively around Gobert, and that worked too. And that is coaching. I mean, what is that if not what the coach's job is to do? And he's after being the offensive wizard, has been a I don't know, one of the best defensive coaches in the league for sure.
They just consistently like, here's our personnel. How do we make this work with our personnel? Toggling schemes. Like, well, last year we did this. This is not going to work anymore. Now we need to do this. He's mentioned it before. Like on a nightly basis, they're like, basically, how do we accentuate Rudy, like, and make sure that Rudy is the focal point of this and also not overly expose Cat? Like, there's a lot of thought that goes into what they do on a nightly basis to make this look good. Because I think with other coaches who maybe just, I don't know, they're just not as into the details, it would not look this good. I just think like we give a lot of praise to Rudy and whatnot, but like the coaching staff has done a really great job, especially on the defensive end, making this work and making this into like a dominant defense where, you know, a Cat at the 4 would be really hard, I think.
Yeah. How many coaches would have tried that?
Right.
I wouldn't have.
Right. I mean,
it seemed crazy.
And offensively, like you've always said, like the boys been kind of been a second half of the year offense, and like, I don't know, maybe it's getting there.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. I don't think we've done a pod in like 2 weeks, and over the last 2 weeks, you know, up to All-Star break, they're fourth on offense.
Right.
And I was looking at it last week, and I just did like all the 2-week chunks of the season, and like the best they had been offensively for one of those 2-week chunks was 11th, and the worst was like 20th or 21st or something. And it was all in there. It was like 3 weeks they were 19th on offense, and it's just kind of who the team had become. And I don't want to just again go off of only 2 or 3 weeks, and they played Portland a couple times in there, whatever, to be like this team has figured it out offensively, and they're here we go. But this is the best the offense has looked for an extended stretch of the entire season. And I mean, it kind of feels like they're playing the same basketball they were before Christmas, before some of the air kind of let out of this. I guess offensively, but overall, what do you think has gone into this? They're 9-3 since the Charlotte disaster. Like what's driving that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like the suffocating defense has been back for the most part, but then offensively, like it's just better. I mean, I always say like it kind of goes back to Ant in my mind. Like he's done a better job like picking his spots, and even the games where he goes on like a great first quarter run, he's not then like forcing it and chasing a big number after that. Like he's really kind of let the game come to him and let the game kind of dictate it. There's been a lot more just ball movement in general. And like Mike Conley has said, like there's just more cutting and there's more of everything. There's more of just doing everything a little bit harder and being a little bit more intentional. Like it's like, yeah, okay, here's what it's supposed to look like. And it's not like they've changed up what they wanted to do offensively. It's that the guys have just done it better and quicker. Yeah, even like Carl with some of his decision making and whatnot. And I think Carl's been a lot more like, I'm just going to shoot the ball as part of those decision makings. And you see how much that opens everything up. It's like it really is like, here's what's frustrating of like always wanting to blame like the coach for offensive things. They are just now doing the things that he said to do all season, you know, like, and when the players start to do it, when it starts to sink in, it looks good. So now I think it's just, and here's the thing with coaching across all sports, especially basketball, especially the NBA, it's just staying on top of it. It's constantly reminding, remember, you're doing well. Keep doing it. Keep doing it. We might fall back into our old habits here. Stay on top of it. Let's keep going here because it's not like their status quo still.
And it was the meat on the bone joke at the early part of the year. Like Finch has had this energy the whole time.
Yeah.
Of like
frustrated when they win. Like, I don't know what we're doing offensively, you know, like
because he doesn't have the sickness, the Minnesota sports sickness. He does, you know, and to some extent, even you and I do too, where it like leads us to think about how it is going to go wrong. I think Finch just didn't assume it was going to go wrong. He was like, all right, here are the things we're good. Here are the things we need to get better at. He's had that energy the whole time, probably to the extent where he's annoyed the players of being like, what? Like we're 30-10. Like, what do you mean we're not doing this well? It's like, well, you're not doing that well. And like, and I think he has just yanked this up to the level of like, hey, do we actually want to contend now? Because we kind of got to do it now. Right. Like, you want to do it now? This is what we have to do. And he's had that same energy the whole season. And to that end, you know, it's worked, and it's deserving of being the all-star game coach or whatever. He's been one of the best coaches in the NBA this season, even through a lot of the stuff that has been irksome at times, you know, that was a little bit him, probably a little bit more on the players. But I just think I found it to be difficult in just my job of like nitpicking over the course of the season. And I'm like, people just spraying stuff at me like, what are you doing? They're 30 and
yeah.
10, Dane, and
then
it's
you
like,
also
whatever.
got people. You also have people being like, "Are you going to talk about this?
Yeah.
Why they
It's kind
suck
of
at
weird.
this?" Yeah, it is both ears.
Yeah. I think it's admirable of Finch to not have let go of that, and to constantly had that stacking mentality over the course of the season. And it appears to be stacking, right? The things that you and I were talking about like 3 months ago that were glaring concerns are just like a little bit of concerns now.
Mhm.
They're not gone. This team can regress. We see
Yep.
it about once a week, right?
Yep.
But it's never slipped out of the best stat for that, right? Is they've never lost 3 games in a row this season.
Correct.
Like that's a Finch coaching thing too, for sure.
How many times do you think, like, over the course, and not ever since they won last year, but like people thought Mike Malone was an idiot?
Yeah,
Many, right? Many.
Mhm.
Like it's just like it, and especially if you closely follow a team, there are going to be things about the head coach that annoy you. They're going to be like, "Why don't they do this better? Why don't they do this? Why aren't we doing more of this?" Like, and part of that is probably coach set blind spots, and part of it also is like, no, if we did that, our personnel would not work. And we just can't know that, or like these players just aren't comfortable doing this, whatever. Like, and yeah, and sometimes there are things that they could just do better. Like there are things players can all do better. Like it's that's just the way it works. But I do think a big thing for like a Finch in this team has been that the coach is consistently pushing for better, never really settling. And I think that's why, like, just even the quotes that came out of All-Star, like there was a little bit more of like Finch being like, "This is pretty cool. Like this experience is cool."
Good for him.
Like taking a moment too to be like, "We have done some cool things this year," like where you can kind of take a step back, and which is
he hasn't really done that with us.
No. It's like, yeah, I guess we have. I'm proud of what we've done here and here, and like. When you can take a step out and not be like, we got a game in 2 days, we got to be way better at this. Right. The All-Star break's good for that. And then you get a few days and then you zero back in on like Wednesday of like, how do we beat Milwaukee? But they've done a lot of awesome things this year. And I think the coaching staff has been, I've always said, like, probably a bigger part of that even than like gets credit for, because there are other coaches who probably would not have made this roster work this well. Not probably, definitely. No. Tim Conley even says it. Like anybody can be like, fire Finch. Tim Conley, every time he goes on any radio thing or anything, we got one of the best coaching staffs in the NBA. He said that from beginning of the season all the way through.
And I think specifically what Finch has been proud of, and when he has reveled in it, is what you wrote about. The kind of the 3-year process and the ability to navigate that, and really the help he received in that process from Ant and Kat, of like actually embracing that. And I think Carl, again, in some of the stories he told that you guys wrote about, like Carl played a pretty big role in that.
Right.
And Ant was the bleary-eyed 20-year-old or 19-year-old. But in time, like really took to Finch too. And I think that's something to be proud of if you're Chris Finch, of like, I picked up this burning pile of whatever. And
I was waiting to see what word you're going to use there. You landed on whatever. It's probably good.
That's probably a better idea. I mean, I'd be proud of that. If I was Chris Finch, I'd be proud of my 3 years since getting my first head coaching job. And there's been a whole million different things, like you said, that has happened over that time. And he's just that dude, man. He stays right there. He's calm. he is a calm person. And that works here in a big way.
I don't know how else to say it. Like his most impressive trait is that like Karl Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards are totally opposite people. Players take totally different coaching. And he's managed to really get the best out of both players. And without really upsetting anybody. And like, he's able to do it where like Karl doesn't feel like he's just getting dumped on all the time. Finch really takes every opportunity to lift Karl up. He sacrificed the most. He's done this. He's been amazing at this while also holding him accountable. And to where like Rudy Gobert is like, I loved how last year everybody was being held accountable all the time. When we were doing terrible, like
and Rudy's such a different personality to throw into that mix too.
Yeah. Yes. 100%, like, and it's been, and that was like a fine line to walk, as Rudy's coming in being like, here's how I always do everything. And it's worked forever. And being like, okay, can you work with us a little bit? We'll work with you a little bit, like, and like you were in the locker room at the beginning of last year. These players were like, we were good last year, and then we brought this guy in, and now we're not. I mean, that was literally the vibe. I mean, that was
Totally.
the vibe. And Finch was able to be like, you're not winning in a big way without this guy. Right. You know, like, and he is here. And here is we are going to make this work, and he has. Like, there are just not many coaches that type of stuff doesn't end with you back at home and somebody else with your job. But Finch was so good and handled everything so well, like the different fires throughout the last 3 years, and he's put them all out and emerged in just such a tremendous spot. Like, I just don't think there are many coaches who would have done that.
Yeah, I think the job required a certain type of personality that Finch happens to have, and then he's executed through that. Like just having that like what you said, he's really high, like social IQ.
Right.
Like it was that this team needed the high social IQ to navigate the Cat, Ant, Rudy dynamic of being three very different players at three very different stages in their careers. And then the coaching. You had to do the coaching too. And,
right. X's and O's have to be there.
And those have been there in 3-4 different ways. They've played different styles of play. Yeah. It is a good time to reflect on how good, Finch has been this season, but also just, your guys' stories reminded me over this week. I was like, oh yeah, Finch has been here for 3 years. I'm like, that went fast. But two, he deserves it. And it was cool for him to get that moment at All-Star. And yes, if you want to check out Jace's piece, you can find that at the Pioneer Press. You can follow Jace on Twitter at Jace Frederick. Last things from me. Remember, we got that Falling Knife event this Thursday, live show, me and Britt. Again, come with questions on your mind. We'll kind of open up, but we like to take a bunch of questions and kind of talk about what you guys want to hear. So we'll do that at Falling Knife this Thursday. And then also, I mentioned this before, but we do have a pair of tickets to give away to Saturday's game against the Brooklyn Nets. If you are available to go to that game, send us a message on Patreon that you're available. And if you want to become a Patreon subscriber, you can do that at Patreon, patreon.com/DaneMooreNBA. It's also in the show notes on YouTube or on your podcast player. Appreciate you listening to us. We'll be back. Britt and I will be back on Thursday. That's the next episode. And then we'll do this second half of the season. Jace, appreciate you doing it.
Always fun, man.
Until Thursday with Britt, he's Jace. I'm Dane. Peace out.
How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Green and hot so you can find me in the crowd, yeah.